Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and I'm going to continue with some wonderful tips given by Martha Sweezy at the end of her book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt. And in the last video, I did the first 3 tips she gives, and I'm going to do 3 more today. This is on page 257 in the book, if you're following along. But I'm going to read it to you. The first of the 3 tips today is positive reinforcement is more effective than punishment. This is shown to be true in lab tests that scientists have done. I learned from my psychology training. But let's see what Martha says. She says, criticism and shaming are punishment, and punishment is shaming. I just want to stop with that sentence. They're kind of, I like how she's saying that. When we shame someone, the intention is to punish them into doing or not doing what we don't want them to do, right? And so shame is always punishment. And any kind of punishment, whether it's corporal punishment, hitting someone, or withdrawing affection or attention, taking away something they love, is shaming. It sends the message of shame. So in many ways, shame and punishment are synonymous. Yeah. So she goes on and says, shaming is an aversive consequence, say a public reprimand aimed at stopping an unwanted behavior, but it leads to vengeful rebellion. So in the big picture, you don't get what you want from that. In contrast, positive reinforcement, such as paying attention, offering food or reward, aims to increase a desired behavior. Karen Pryor in 2006 called positive reinforcement the good fairy of behaviorism. Internal critics use the bad fairy, punishment, which is punishment. And in return, they get rebellion. And that's why there's this whole cycle of shame, right? They're using the bad fairy, they're using punishment and shame, and other parts rise up in rebellion and push back because it's painful, it's not true, the messages of shame are not true, so they push back. And then of course the inner critics and outer critics punish and shame more, and it just goes back and forth forever. Okay, so she says, because they are tired and unhappy with this outcome, they really want social inclusion, safety, security, and happiness. They benefit from understanding how they can really be helpful. So I think she's talking about the inner critics here and how their values, their intentions, what they really want are good things, right? They want us to have social inclusion. They want us to be safe and secure and happy. And we can recognize that and kind of offer to them, is what you're doing, is your strategy working? And often inner critics will say, no, it's not working. I'm so tired. I don't know what else to do. And so then we can offer an alternative strategy of, I think she's going to say, positive reinforcement. So she says, although we cannot control each other, we can and do routinely influence each other. The good fairy of positive reinforcement, ignoring behaviors we wish to minimize while paying attention to behaviors we aim to maximize, takes discipline and the willingness to try something new, but it is the most effective way of exerting influence. Okay, she's making so many good points here. This is Martha Sweezy is always, no word is not purposeful, right? Every word is intentional. So I love here that she's making this distinction that we cannot control other people, we cannot control parts, but when we've gained trust, we can influence. And that influence is more powerful and effective when it's positive reinforcement. So instead of putting all of the attention on the negative thing that we don't like, if say we're a parent with our child, right? Because our self is like the parent of the inner children, it's completely parallel. Instead of putting all the focus on this negative thing and sending this message of shame, and then the child rebelling and pushing back to say, no, no, I am good, right? That's the same thing that happens on the inside with our parts. But the alternative is to focus on the good, focus on what is working, and you know, reinforce that. I'm noticing parts that come up in me right now as I'm saying that. That also, I guess I just want to make a side note, because I really value nonviolent communication. And even in nonviolent communication, positive reinforcement can also be negative in the sense that the child or parts of us begin to crave that. Oh, if I'm only accepted and only given love and only given approval when I do this thing or I behave this way. And so they can actually, in my experience, take on messages of shame that are kind of implicit in that positive reward. And so I see what Martha's saying, because a lot of times when our inner critics are relieved of their burden and this terrible job of criticizing inside, they become inner cheerleaders, right? And they notice the good things and they celebrate, and it's wonderful, and it's very supportive to the system and maybe can create some balance in the system. But the self, in my experience, just has unconditional positive regard, no matter what our parts, our inner children do. Kind of like a loving parent has unconditional positive regard for their kids. They want good things for them, so they want to influence and encourage them to do things that are positive and healthy for them. But the best, in my experience, what the self knows is that the best route to get the parts to choose what's healthy and good for themselves is to reflect back their innate value and worth. Because once the parts know how valuable and loved they are, no matter what, they begin to make choices and have creative strategies that are in alignment with that naturally. So that's just a little side note I want to say there. Okay. So the second tip that Martha gives is to welcome skepticism and distrust. I agree. These are valuable parts, or skeptical parts. She says, I ask wary protectors to think of therapy as a laboratory experiment. Wonderful. They don't have to believe anything I say about internal resources, but they do have to meet the self to find out if I'm telling the truth. Exactly, exactly. So that's all she says on that one. In the weekly Tuesday IFS community group yesterday, we were talking about this because we've been going over common concerns that protective parts have with allowing the self to go to what they protect to help it. And a lot of times there will be skeptical parts. I don't think this will work. I don't think you'll be able to do it. You'll get overwhelmed. The system will be overwhelmed. They have all kinds of questions and concerns. And in my experience, again, the self says, like Martha says, you don't have to believe it without any evidence. But so we have to work out a way for you to gain evidence to see if what I'm saying is true. So I'm offering this hope that there is one inside, this self, who can handle the overwhelming emotions of the exiles, can be with them in a loving and strong way, can heal their root pain, bring them out of the past, unburden them. But I know you have to have evidence that that's true. So can we do an experiment, right? Can you let the self who's not a part go to that young one you protect for 10 seconds? Or sometimes you'll negotiate. Can we go there for 10 minutes? And they'll say no, 5, right? Or no, 2 minutes. And it's okay. I always say, as little amount of time as they will allow, that's always what you want to start with. So if you can have 10 seconds of just allowing a pain to come up and see it and love it and just say, I see you, I'm here with you, I love you. That's how it started for me, right? I would have to go, the negotiation for me was I had to go to a private place, could not be in front of other people. So I would go to the bathroom or the closet and just put my hand on my heart whenever I noticed, really activated, painful parts coming up. And I would say, beloved, I see your suffering and I'm here with you. And that was it. And eventually, my protective system, many of those parts began to see that that was actually effective and that my young parts relaxed when I did that. And so they had to gain that evidence before they trusted it. And so it was this gradual shift of pulling me away from pain, distract, escape, numb, dissociate, right? To allowing me to go toward pain more and more often, to be with it in a loving way. And then eventually that default shifted. And my protective part started saying, please, please, there's one who's in pain. Go there, please go. So they gained the trust naturally. All right. So the last tip I want to present today is to unload burdens as soon as possible. Martha says, if your client is carrying a literal burden on their back or in their arms, heart, teeth, joints, or muscles, they will literally lighten their load and get a sense of buoyancy when they unload that burden. After unburdening, the exile invites desired qualities to fill the space created by the unburdening. But let's say an exile isn't ready to unburden at the end of a session. No problem. Martha says the part can opt to put its burden or burdens in storage and invite those desired qualities in for just a trial run. This strategy rewards partial efforts and brings at least temporary relief, can calm protectors, and make it easier to return to the exile the next week. This also facilitates the final unburdening. I thought this is a great tip because I often talk about offering experiments to our protective parts that have concerns, but sometimes when we approach exiles, they also have concern. Maybe they're not ready to come out of that time yet. And so they need to experiment with it. Can I come out and see if it's safe, but I have the option to go back, right? So that might be something they'll do. Maybe they have concerns about releasing their burdens, right? I've had parts who've had all kinds of different concerns, right? It'll be disloyal to one of my loved ones who basically was the legacy burden that passed down, disloyal to my ancestors. Or if I don't carry this, a big protective part, like a suicidal part, will come in. Or I won't know who I am without it, right? They'll have these concerns. And so the self can propose these little experiments. What if we just took part of the burden off and see how you feel for a day or two? And you can grab it back at any time. There's always free will for every part, right? They always have autonomy and sovereignty over what they choose to do or not do. You can have a part who agrees to give up their burden and the next day says, no, I got to take it back. And the self will honor that and say, okay, if you feel like you need to take it back, I know there's a reason, and we're not going to release it until you feel confident and safe enough to do that, right? So I like this proposal that Martha has, where especially if you're an IFS practitioner, between sessions, you can say, well, what if you put the burden in this storage unit and then test it out for this week and see what it feels like to not carry that burden. And it sounds like what Martha's saying, and I have seen this to be true in clients and in myself, sometimes our parts actually carry the burden somewhere literally in our bodies, right? We have neck pain, shoulder pain, headaches, back pain, knee pain because of what they're carrying. And when they practice putting it away in the storage, the pain actually goes away. And they go, whoa, that's amazing, right? And so they have to start gaining evidence that it could be freeing, but kind of just doing that experiment. I often tell this story, but I remember when I had parts who held this belief that I am bad, I am a sinner at my core, and they were very, very afraid to release that because they thought if I release that, then I won't have humility. I'll be selfish. I'll be arrogant. I'll be all these things that are punishable, right? And so myself proposed, well, what if we just pretend that we believe that we're lovable at our core, that we're innately good? Just pretend for a week. That was the experiment. And just look at the fruit that it produces. Just see what happens in the inside and on the outside when you pretend that, because sometimes our parts hold, their belief is their burden. Pretend you have an opposite belief and just see what happens. And you afterward, if it's terrible and you become a pillaging murderer, if the fruit is bad, you can take it back. And after that week, the fruit of it was so good. I was no longer turned inward in this shame spirals. I was able to show up with confidence. I was able to give from overflow to people. I actually became much more generous and able to see and consider other people. The fears that my parts had did not come true. And they were able to see that in the experiment. And so then they felt much more confident and safe and letting go of that belief that I was bad at my core. So I love that. Experiment, offer experiments, because that's what offers experience to the parts so that they can trust naturally. They never have to be forced into believing or doing anything. All right. I hope you appreciated those tips from Martha. And if you have anything you want to share in the comments or you have any questions about them, please feel free to leave them in the comments below.